And hello folks, hopefully things should have actually started. So this is the bit where I just get to talk randomly for a few moments. And we get to try and make sure that things are working for people. So, sooner or later, that lovely background shot that just said nothing's happening is about to be replaced by a something is indeed happening screen. So hopefully that's happening sometime around now. So before I start my ramblings, let's say hello to the channel. Make sure people are alive, and make sure things are indeed working. So, to those of you out there, hello, I'm going to wait and see if I get a response. Aha, we do. So, first things first, it's going to be a case of a few apologies. Sudo is apparently, is not well. So we've had to recombobulate things at the last moment and come up with a new plan. And so the new plan, I'm afraid, is you get myself on a soapbox. But this is where I'm looking for you guys in the channel to talk, to interact, and what we're going to do is a few different things. Firstly, I've got a little bit of a topic I want to pick up on and start with, and it is called The Journey Begins, because, well, there's a lot of that going on at the moment. There's a certain game that's a few weeks around the corner, down the horizon. There's new games being talked about. We know we've got the Warlords expansion coming up. H1Z1 is all the rage. And we have both developers, producers, guilds, game players, embarking on these new journeys. But what do you actually need to do to make this transition into something new? How do we actually make it a success? So rather than just talk about I've stacked up 5,000 packets of Doritos and Jelly Babies, so I don't need to move for 3 days, we're going to talk a little bit more analytically about the mindset of players and guilds, and also the mindset of developers, producers and publishers if they're starting something new, and how do they get that information out to the communities? How do you line up the expectations of, we're a guild, we're going to go rock the Casbah in this new game? And then, what is the game? Is it what you expect? Are you as players, or as a guild, prepared for the game? Are your expectations lined up? So there's a lot of stuff there to dig into. But beyond that, we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. Anything you want on that topic, or indeed anything at all on MMOBuff.TV, and I've had a few people ask me about tech we're using and bits and pieces, so wherever people want to go, that's where we're going to go. But we shall start at the very beginning. So, the journey begins. Something new is around the corner, and as a guild, you want to go play it. Or as a player, by yourself, you want to go play this game. And yet the game has also been coded, produced, published, usually, to actually get there in the first place. So two different sets of people with different ideas have done a load of work to say, let's make something happen. And how do you turn this into a marriage made in heaven, as opposed to a disaster? The first thing is to say, from a player's perspective, are you prepared? It might be a great quote from a certain boss in a certain game, but actually it's a very, very true statement. So what does it mean to actually be prepared? Well, do you know what's expected of you, the player? Has that been communicated by the game developers? Have you got the information to act on? So to be prepared as a player, what do you need? Well, if you're going to be raiding, if you're going to be doing structured PvP content, if you're going to be doing many things that involve that multiplayer aspect, well, you need the right number of players. And you need those players to be on the same page, in the same place, with the same mindset, etc., etc., etc. So, new game, new guild. How do you go from being, we are just this name, to, well, we're now taking names? First thing is, you've actually got to be communicating. And we can start with communicating internally. If you're a group of players, and let's take Wildstar, it's the nearest one. If you're a group of players, you're about to get involved in this game, how do you make sure you're all on the same page? Well, you communicate. That means you're probably going to have a website. You almost certainly will have some form of chat system, in terms of voice, be it TeamSpeak, be it Mumble, be it Vent, be it Raid Call, there's a myriad of options out there now. Now, if you are a new guild, or an existing guild, starting in, let's say, WildStar, 4 or 5 weeks down the line, if you aren't already talking about it on a regular basis with each other, you're a long way away from being ready. You should already be having meetings, working out who's doing what, working out if you've got the classes, if you've got the distribution of classes, working out who's going to heal, who's going to tank, who's going to DPS, working out who's responsible for different things. Someone somewhere has to be responsible for getting hold of new players. Someone's got to be responsible for saying, hey, this player we picked up, Bob, he's not great. How are we going to handle that? And there's a lot of organisation that needs to take place. It doesn't take place by itself. So if you're not doing it already, it's not going to happen very well. And hello, Ren is 12. So we've got a group of players. You're all doing something together. You know what you're doing. You're communicating, and launch day starts. So you come around, you jump into early access, and you all go running around in different directions doing different things with no coordination whatsoever. Yes? Well, hopefully not, because hopefully you've got a very solid plan. And that plan is going to be addressing the mindset of you, the players. So what's your mindset? Is it to go and take names and bosses and raid? Is it to do dungeon content? Is it to be the best crafters and control the economy? Is it to be a fantastic social guild, inviting everyone, helping them, just building this vibrant, talkative community to enjoy leveling? Well, whatever it is, as long as you're all on the same page, that's okay. But there are things you're going to have to have done and things you're going to have to have got organised, because the most common failure and fracturing that I see of people starting games in a guild is one group of people want this, one group of people want that, and this and that don't necessarily, well, they do that, but doesn't always lead to a friendly confluence of interests and people. Let's take one of the best examples out there at the start of a new game, and that is the leveling curve. So you're going to start leveling, and you can knock over bosses quickly. Run, kill. No time to stop, no time to drink, no time to eat. Hopefully you do stop to go to the toilet, because none of those bottle devices here. And you're at maximum level, fantastic, let's go do stuff. And you turn around and all the people you're with are actually just hit level 7. And you don't want to roll an alt. Now, if you've got players in that mindset, you're actually going to have some pretty unhappy players if their aim and their idea is to get on with endgame, or elder game in this case, content. How do you manage that process? Again, it comes down to setting expectations before you actually get to that point. One thing that I've done before, and that I've seen others do very successfully, is you set an expectation as to leveling speed. Right. Those of you that are on the raid team, on the PvP team, on the arena team, whatever it might be, we're going to be this level at this point in time. And you put a marker down on the sand. That way, if people get there 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of that date, you've already set an expectation that they're going to have to kick their heels a little bit until some others catch up. You also have to make some smart decisions. Let's say 5 players get to max level really fast and they want to go raiding. Another guild might have 15 players that have got to max level really fast, and they invite your 5 along to go do a couple of raids. Is that good? Is that bad? Does it help? Does it hinder? It all depends on how you manage the process. Of course, what you don't want to do, if you don't have close ties to these people and it's a new guild, is potentially bleed players, because people want to go and do what they want to go and do, and if it's available somewhere else and if you're not offering it, well, that's an easy route to hemorrhage players. So you have to make a decision. Do you turn around and say, no, we don't want people to go play with others? We want you to come back and support the guild? Do you say, yes, go ahead, knock yourselves out, but this is when we need you and this is what we need you for? Again, it's all communication. One thing that I would strongly advise any guild, players, group of people to do is to turn around and say, right, we're 10 days in, guild meeting, where are we at for leveling? Who's ahead of the curve? Who's behind the curve? Did we turn around and say we'd all be leveled in 2 weeks, but actually the highest level in the guild is 20? In which case we better change those dates and recommunicate. So things like that need to go on all of the time. And the constant issue here is communication, internal communication. Setting and resetting and assessing the expectations that you have on players. And you have to deal with that as you see fit, and you have to have people assigned to the jobs. The job of saying, hey Bob, you're not leveling fast enough, can we help you? Or the job of saying, are people doing what they need to be doing? Are you stockpiling crafting materials? Are you organised? Does everyone have a job? Does everyone have something they're responsible for? And do you get together to go, hey, we're actually doing it? So the biggest single caveat there is internal communication. Now, it's all well and good turning around and saying, right, you're a guild, you're a group of players, you're organised, you know what you're doing, off you go. What about it from when the shoe is on the other foot? Because in a new game, and let's take a great example that people have been talking about for a long while in WildStar, and that is the telegraphs. People have expectations. And we have seen for a long while people talking about telegraphs. They're easy mode. You can see the telegraph, you can move out the way. Raiding and gameplay will be trivial. It's only recently that the lie has been put to that. With the first time at PAX, we saw some public footage of Datascape. And it showed just how phenomenally difficult those telegraphs appear to be. And it's another classic case of expectation management and communication. So, Carbine have now let people know that this stuff is not going to be a cakewalk. They've been saying it for a while, but people haven't really necessarily believed them. Many games companies go, our content will be hard. Leveling will take 100 hours. And then someone gets to max level inside of 4 or 5 days, and people find the content to be easy, etc., etc., etc. So that has now been addressed because we've seen some footage. But up until that point in time, there was an expectation gap. Company is saying one thing, community in the main part is often assuming another thing, and until that information came out in a visible way, games like to see stuff and touch stuff, people didn't necessarily tie the two bits together. And this leads to an interesting conundrum if you are a game developer. You want to have new and shiny stuff to show people. You want to show people stuff when it's ready. You want to be able to show people stuff that's realistic. Yet at the same time, you've got 1 million internet users who want to know everything about your game right now, today, this second, this moment. And if you don't give them that information, they get bored. They go elsewhere. They make negative assumptions. Yet if you do give them all the information now, it's like having 15 starters at a restaurant. And by the time you roll around to the main course, you're not so hungry anymore. And by the time you roll around to the dessert, well, the cheese course isn't getting a look in. Because people get saturated and if they can't get hands-on at the same time, that starts to become an issue. So communication is a two-way street in terms of preparing to get ready to go. Now, Screenager, hello Screen, just came up with a really, really good point. And that is to do with the relationship between your group of players, your guild, and another lot. How do you get the right sort of relationships? What are the right sort of relationships, and what can you do with them? Well, if you are friendly with another guild, if you co-opt to work together, and you can get, good level of rapport and trust between you, then it opens up possibilities. You can turn around and say, well, at end level, we'll let our first lot run with your first lot, and we'll make sure that, everyone comes back to home base at the right point in time. You can do stuff like that. You can turn around and say, while we're getting ready to level, ready to raid, If we're short of a couple, we'll come knock on your door. And if you're short of a couple, you come knock on ours. And if we find out some cool stuff about how to do this in the arena, we'll share it with you, and vice versa. Now, how long that lasts for, how well that works, depends on a couple of things. It depends on whether the groups of players are equals, whether or not they start to become rivals, which is always an issue, because, of course, if one group is way ahead of the other group, then if one group is taking on the mentor-type role, that's fine. But if both groups believe themselves to be very equal and one group is way ahead in terms of content, progression, success, it can start to build up a little bit of resentment. The relationship can start to become a one-way street. On the counterpoint of that, though, if the groups are really, really level, they're really, really equal, then there's a natural propensity for rivalry. And this can be managed, it can be turned into good rivalry, as Guernicus says. You can have all the friendly banter and then meet up down the pub, virtual or otherwise. Or it actually can become quite a negative drain on yourselves, on the community. It can lead to sniping, backbiting, forum trolls, disagreements, all of that stuff. Gazimov is clearly interested in meeting at the pub. Good afternoon, sir. So, I'm going to bounce this out to the channel now. Let's have what issues have people here run into in terms of experiences at the start of a game? What have people done to make sure that they themselves and their groups are ready, able, willing? And what are some of the best and the worst experiences people have seen at the launch of games? I'll talk about 2 game launches while people think about that and the delay catches up. And I'm going to talk about SW Tour, and I'm going to talk about Guild Wars. 2 reasonably recent launches that both had some similarities and some vast differences. Now, it's fair to say at this point that the perception of the 2 games in the main is now very, very different. Both big budget games, both created by established companies who've got a lot of history, who know what they're doing. One perhaps an even bigger budget game than the other. Don't know the precise numbers, but I would suspect so. Looking at everything involving EA and BioWare with the launch of SW Tour, it wasn't a quick endeavour. A lot of time and effort went into creating an MMO in really one of the most epic IPs that could ever exist in a gaming context. I mean, it's Star Wars. Can't get that wrong, right? Yet, sadly, for many players, they did. And let's take a look at some of the things that caused that disparity. The first thing I'll say is communication was not as good as it could have been as we got nearer and nearer to a launch, and it appears, to all intents and purposes, that the expectations the developers and publishers had were not as realistic as they might have been in terms of the speed of people's leveling curve and the consumption of content. SW Tour was created on the premise of the 5th pillar, one major aspect. Let's have story as a mainstay. So many new innovations were there. Voice acting was in there, and the story-driven experience indeed was a fantastic one. Not totally my personal cup of tea, but I can appreciate it for exactly what it was. A lot of people absolutely loved it. Flew through the story, enjoyed the choices they were making. You can debate whether the light side, dark side stuff was particularly relevant choices, whether they all led to the same paths or not. But there were choices there. People were making choices, people were enjoying the story, people got to end level and then went, what do I do now? And the answer was, sadly, for quite a while, unless you wanted to roll an alt, not a lot. You could run some endgame content, that was there at the time. There was some of it was fantastic. The puzzles to solve in some places were brilliant. But the dungeon and raid experience was pretty lacking once you started to dig into it deeply. It was buggy, there were tuning issues, there were reliability issues, and there frankly wasn't a lot of it. So you had a whole group of people that had an expectation. We'll come full circle now, round to our point. And that expectation was that there'd be The mainstay of the game would be once they hit endgame, because that is the mindset of an MMO player. Got to endgame, not a lot to do, disenfranchised, upset, unhappy bunnies. Lots of negativity starts to emerge in the community, and that has a very, very typical effect. Players leave. The game becomes less enjoyable for a number of players that are there. As better content, polished content, more content does emerge, the same size of the player base is not actually there to receive it. So you can make the argument that in terms of communication, in terms of setting player expectations, in terms of understanding anticipated player behavior, and in terms of providing the desired content for players, in the initial stages of that release, once you reach the end game, I separate the story-driven get-to-end-game component, they were not as prepared as the community expected them to be. One thing they did do that I've not... For me, it was fantastic. Some people had issues with it. But one thing I found to be exceptionally good was the way they went through the guild creation, launch, server allocation process. Absolutely superb. It made life very easy in terms of preparation from a guild leader's perspective. Really good stuff. But ultimately, the game didn't deliver. They weren't as ready for that journey. They weren't as prepared for launch as everyone might have liked. And lots of negativity ensued. Now, the counterpoint to that, let's look at another game. And again, this is a game that I can appreciate for being highly polished, but not one that I'm personally hugely invested in. And that's Guild Wars 2. Now, a different approach was taken with this game right the way through. In terms of the conceptual design of the game, in terms of the delivery of the game, in terms of the launch process, so many things were done differently. But there's one thread that ran throughout, and that is a level of communication that was upheld, that was at quite a high level, and a level of dialogue with the community that kept them informed as to what was going on. Now, let's be honest, it was a pretty smooth launch. Very few issues. Most people were playing within the first X hours. I'm trying to recall right now, and I'm sure someone will remind me. I believe this is where we did the... No, this isn't where we did the tiered launching by launch slots, is it? I'm trying to remember back now myself. I do remember the frantic run round to get the guild name organised and other bits and pieces right at the beginning. But they communicated, they set expectations, they in the main delivered on those expectations, they had a polished game, and then they started releasing content. Again and again and again and again and again. The sort of episodic content release that they've managed to produce, the cadence of how they produce updates, absolutely phenomenal. And that started a long, long, long time before launch. You'd argue from that perspective, they're more prepared for launch. They were ready for that journey. It's confirmed they did turn everything on at once. So, all credit, because for the most part, for most people, it seems to work. I'm sure there'll be some people with opposite experiences, but that was the general trend in the community at the time was positive. Now, indeed, there's the cadence, as screen says. You may have just lagged out while I was talking about that screen. Now, the other thing they managed to do was set people's expectations as to what to find when they got into game. People knew that the Trinity wasn't there before they got there. People knew that various things were different. People had an idea of how hearts and things would work. People knew that there were some things that were going to be different to Guild Wars 1. So the expectations as to what to find had already been set in large parts of the community. Therefore, people aren't turning around and going, this isn't what I expected, this isn't what I wanted. The newer your game, the more different your game systems, the less of a previous IP you have to fall back on, then the more imperative that it is that you are indeed communicating. Because if you aren't setting realistic expectations, then players will turn around and say, but I wanted blueberry muffins every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Now I don't have any, and I'm going to throw all my e-toys out of my e-pram. Because, well, players can be like that. So, preparing for launch, getting ready for that journey, two-way street. So, we threw a question out there a moment ago, and we'll see who's come up with anything to jump on. Good and bad experiences that guilds have had, that groups of players have had at the start of launch during that journey. What have people run into that has been good or bad? Let us see what people come up with. So while we're waiting for that, let's look at what else could go horribly wrong. One thing that I haven't seen yet, and I'm going to reference again WildStar because it's around the corner, and one of the few bits of communication that I wish they'd put out there, if it's out there and I've missed it, please tell me. Servers. We don't yet know all of the actual physical naming options for servers in the relevant territories. It could be that it's the same as some of the beta stuff, it could be that it's not. Someone correct me if they've got information I don't. But it would be good with X weeks to go to start to be able to plan and say, we're going here, we're going there, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. It just starts to enhance and support this communication. And I think they've got, 6 weeks, top of my head? So they've got time to get that out there yet. So I hope that we see that soon. And turn on all the things Bugfest. Now, here Gazmov's made a good point. There were actually a couple of systems that actually had to be turned off at the beginning of the launch, going back to Guild Wars 2. And I think the major ones were in around the auction house, thank you, and around the CX. And Guildbanks apparently had some issues there as well. I actually don't recall that one, Gazzy. I must have not run into that. So yeah, if you are ready for launch, if you're ready for that journey, if you're prepared, your core systems, you don't want to have to turn them off. It might not, sometimes it can't be avoided. But it really depends on how you've tested, how you've managed to do load testing, how you've managed to do stress testing. I mean, it's one thing that we're seeing in the ramp up to games more and more and more, is you have these big open beta weekends. Oh, ESO, I must... Okay, I will be upfront here. I have played a little bit of very, very early ESO and decided that game's not for me, and I haven't actually been back in since. So I actually haven't played it post-launch at all. So other people are going to have to comment on the ESO experience. I'm being told there was a dupe bug in ESO, existed since beta, not fixed, and it got abused in live. Well played. I think did we see something similar in Neverwinter, I think, with a negative number on gold. And Karma to gold conversion, that was out there. GW2 launch bug. So there's always going to be things, but how are they actually dealt with? One thing that can be a mainstay of actually being prepared is actually testing. And too many things now are not really tested. You get this concept of we're going into beta, but half the time it's we're going into extended marketing exercise. Now, some people are guilty of that, some people are not so guilty of that. But, I mean, for example, WildStar, there is a lot of testing that has been going on again and again and again and again and again, and my expectation is that they'll have a very clean launch because of that testing. If not for want of trying. It is not easy to produce an MMO. It is not easy to get content live without it breaking. And it's not easy to spend 5 years working on your digital baby and then put it in front of everyone and go, do what you want with it. Because people will find strange and unusual things to do to it. And there will invariably be things that have to be dealt with. But the community is getting smarter and smarter and smarter around online games. In general now, people will look at an issue, look at something that's buggy, look at something that's crashing and go, could that have been predicted? Was that actually avoidable? And they'll tend to react differently according to a couple of things. Whether or not the community feels it was foreseeable, whether or not the community feels someone has dropped a clanger, and of course, the extent of the issue. There's that the more testing you do, the less likely you're going to have a major issue. And the more testing you're publicly doing, the more you're communicating, the more rope you're actually going to get from the community if something does go AWOL. You can never say with 100% confidence that there is no permutation of stuff that we haven't tried, that we haven't looked at, that we haven't tested. Because you'll always find something. But if a game, if the community leads, the names associated with the game, are known to be communicating and talking, then you're going to get more scope to actually do what you need to do. Also being pointed out that WildStar has 3 different test teams. It's devs test first, and internal. Then of course you've got QA, internal quality assurance. And then of course you've got the player beta test. And the point's being made, is it the amount of testing done, or is it how the testing is done? And you're back into the quality versus quantity. I think in my view you need a little bit of both. You can have the highest quality testing in the world, but if the scope isn't broad enough, you're not necessarily going to get a massive win there. You need to have a bit of breadth as well. As Gazzy's saying, if you have a lot of testing, then it's still going to be rubbish testing, no matter how much of it you do. So there's a curve. You can plot a line somewhere on that curve, and you can come up with a sensible solution. We can talk about the fact that we've been involved in beta for a game for a long time, and rarely have I seen such qualitative testing being done in recent times. So, they're doing good testing, they're doing lots of testing. We've got open beta now that gives some load testing and stress testing on top of that, so they're doing what they can. Jeremy's also spoken about the fact that they're already, for a long while now, they've been working on the post-content release. The interview I did at PAX, and indeed the live stream the other night from Cosmotronic at Meltdown, gave us some new information. We now know there's going to be a PvE zone, a new one, within a month. Why are there no graphs? I'm sorry. Probably because I had about 10 minutes notice of what was happening on the show tonight. I can mime a graph. Does that work? I should probably create something called a mimograph. It's like a spirograph that you can twiddle, but different. Anyhow, they've done it. They're doing a lot of testing. They seem to be doing good testing. They're communicating clearly. They're hitting all the right buttons. I can go back to another game's launch. I can go back to the beta right before launch. And the whole of that beta community was going, this is broken, this is broken, this is broken, this is broken, and nothing changed. Nothing was fixed. Lo and behold, the game emerged, and it was broken. And I'm being told I should get a whiteboard so I can scribble on a whiteboard. I could well do that. And I'm being told that MimeGraph is the estranged cousin of Minecraft. We're clearly going to make a game where with pixels you have to run around and communicate your desires to fellow players with sign language, because no typing is actually going to be allowed. But yes, we're going to get ourselves a mini thing to scribble on, I think, for some point in the future. So, the more different your game, the more you need to be communicating game expectations. The more you're testing, the more you're prepared, the easier your life is going to be. So getting ready for that journey, there's an awful lot to do from the company side of things. But let's step back to guilds. In fact, let's not do guilds. Let's do the individual player. What happens if you're Bob the Third and you want to start playing an MMO? And you like the idea of WildStar, or any game that's coming up around the corner. You want to start playing WoW and Draenor launches. You want to play ESO. What do? Do you just log in and start playing? Well, yeah, to a point. But how do you actually sort of get established in a community? And you've got to look at what's actually being offered by the game. Most games have communities, subcultures, and sub-communities around the game. They're going to be on the forums. Not just the game developers' forums, there's going to be other forums out there. You're going to want to be active. You're going to want to be visible. You're probably going to actually want to be talking and, using this thing called communication. You're going to want to actually be joining groups. You've got to put aside the, if I join the group and get this wrong, someone might shout at me, because, hey, they might, but hopefully they won't, to, if I join this group, I can learn stuff and meet awesome people, and that's going to make my game experience more enjoyable. So for those of you who are flying solo in an MMO, let's not forget the massively multiplayer part of that name. I would encourage you strongly to get involved with groups, be it running dungeons, be it helping someone out with quests, be it just chatting in channels. Make yourself known, communicate, and you'll already be ahead of the curve. Too many people, personal opinion, log in, play a game, don't talk to anyone. And Helza makes a very good suggestion. And indeed, Helza, we're already looking at that. We're actually in the process of looking into new stands and things to achieve that. But I need to get some quite specialist stuff to be able to clamp it in the right place. And reminder to self, stop resting elbows on table. Because I do that. And Tier Arctic says, communication, what is that? A dying art is my reply to that, Tier Arctic. And Gazimov is saying 60 to 70% of players run solo. One thing I'd love to know is what the definition of solo is for that stat. Does that mean I log in and I quest solo? Does that mean I'm not part of a guild, but I still join in group activities? Or, no, don't cut arms off at shoulders. I can point with them, they're useful. So I'm intrigued by the definition of run solo, because I really do struggle with the fact that 7 out of 10 people in an MMO don't talk to anyone else. It strikes me that if that's the main mindset, yeah, it just doesn't work for me at all. I find that stat to be very, very high, so I still think those players must be communicating at some point, but they're probably answering a tick box that says, I quest solo. I don't know. In fact, I shall put that on my to-do list and I shall endeavour to find out, because I know where the source of that stat is. And I'm quite sure, Helza, that there is probably something in the Twitch T's and C's that mean you're probably not allowed to do that live on air. I suspect they might get upset at us, let alone the fact that I'd get quite upset. I quite like my arms. And although I've been told that I'm armless, oh dear, did I just go there? I'd quite like to keep them. So, moving on from live-action Mortal Kombat, as we're now getting in the channel, what I want is your experiences. There's a bunch of you out there. I want to know what you've found to be good or bad. How do you get ready if you're involved in running a guild, a group, or a community for a game? If you are a player running solo, what do you do? If you are just a guildie, what do you do? How do you join in and contribute? What are the conundrums? And we shall see where we go next. A couple of bits just to bring people up to date while we wait for stuff. Oh, I know we have someone coming in and the comment is this, and I find this to be quite true. Tier Arctic says that it believes that solo players often quit an MMO faster than others. And I'd absolutely agree, because if you're flying solo, then although game developers and designers will go out of their way to create content for you, you invariably have less on offer than if you're grouping. I mean, we can make a ton of solo content in a game. Make it good solo content, make it enjoyable solo content, but on the basis that they also need to cater for small groups, big groups, PvP, other elements. It can only ever be a percentage of the content that's out there. So straight away, it's like saying, going to a restaurant and saying, I'm only going to order from this menu, and I'm only going to order fish. Right, what's for dessert? Because there aren't many fishy desserts, and if they are, well, they're a bit fishy. So you should be prepared to try all of the things, and you can have a better play experience because of it. Now, Helza pointing out that WildStar isn't very solo-friendly. Solo questing can be hard, yet questing with 2 people is extremely easy. I might question a little bit, Helza, where and when that opinion is formed, because I would say that that's changed over a number of weeks, and at different points in the level curve, at different points in the beta. Certainly there was a point in time that was very true. My belief is the tuning that's happened recently makes that a little less true. But is it a bad thing if it's hard? Does it mean it's not friendly if it's hard? Some of us would think that hard content is actually good, not necessarily unfriendly. But there must be a balance. If you can't progress, if you can't do anything, if there's no way for you to play the game and enjoy it, then yeah, that's not working from a design perspective. I'm all for, if I go to this zone, I die, it's a hard zone, I'll come back over here and I can do stuff. That's okay. But if you die here, die here, die here, die here, and die there, possibly you've had your arms cut off at the shoulders, or something does need to be tweaked. The Hells is asking which part. I'm saying that the becoming trivial with 2 players or more, I believe, has been tweaked in certain places, certainly for hitting challenges correctly. Things like that. Now, Silico saying, loves to quest solo, but likes to be socially involved in a guild and run group content. Absolutely. And those things are not necessarily a counterpoint to each other. Something I was really pleased to see. I mean, I recently in WildStar, don't know about ESO, but one of the groups that did this best was WoW back in the day. I remember once upon a time seeing elites, seeing group-based content and areas in WoW, and knowing that unless I went in there very, very prepared at the top of my game with, mega gear, or indeed in a group, it was going to hurt. And having content that requires groups, making it part of existing chains and story arcs, in my view, so there's a real desire to complete the content, is great. It creates that communication word that we're coming back to again, it creates that joint experience, and it gives people another facet to their gameplay. Silico point making a point that sometimes it can feel like you're impeding others questing as a group. Possibly, but maybe you can be helping just as much at other points in time. I mean, everyone levels differently, everyone does things differently. It's why having a strong social group such as a guild is such a good thing, because you get to know each other. There's pluses and minuses to every single approach. Now, Terarctic again, an MMO where you just get to the level cap without any challenging stuff, the MMO becomes boring and repetitive. I agree. And I'll put something else in there as well, that if you can get to the level cap without a challenge, you aren't then prepared for what's at the end of the game, unless there's no challenge there either. And if there's no challenge at Elder Game, stroke End Game, stroke Raiding Game, stroke PvP Game, stroke Ladder, stroke whatever it is you're interested in, there probably isn't much point in playing the game for an extended period of time. So yeah, there needs to be stuff. But what should happen is that difficulty should ramp. It should steadily ramp up piece by piece by piece as your character develops, as your skills develop, as you get new tools, as you learn how to use them. Things should get harder, but you should be raising your game to meet those challenges as time goes on. And that way, the whole of the process of leveling could become a equipping experience, preparing you for endgame, preparing for the end of things. And I'm really not sure what you're interested in there, Angelic Mayhem, but welcome. So, Helza enjoys hard content. Silico says, I like questing as a group. I find no one here going, I want easy content. In fact, I never see that. But I frequently find people saying on forums and elsewhere content is too hard. And there's a disparity there. Because no one turns around and says, give me easy content. Yet people do turn around and say, hard content, difficult. Now, if we don't want easy content, don't we have to accept that the alternative is hard content? Or am I missing something here? There should be a number of elements to actually enjoy and play. And some of them should be hard. Some of them should be really challenging. Some of them should just be knocking you over, taking names, and those tricycle wheels should be killing you. Branching content, indeed, is what Angelic Mayhem is talking about. I'm going to make the assumption here that you're talking about choices of where to go and what to do. And Helza pointing out there's a fine line between hard and too hard. It depends on the player's skill and knowledge. Absolutely, but one person's too hard is another person's too easy. This is what makes things so difficult from a balancing perspective. We're back to preparation. From the dev's perspective, they need to be monitoring stuff in the beta, closed, open, internal, whatever it might be, and going, this is where players die. These are the quests that people are struggling with. This is the stuff that no one's worked out how to solve. This is the thing where people log out and don't log back in again. All stuff we know that they're doing. But the more you do that, the more you can tune. And an interesting conundrum is tuning. The MMO vet is such an advanced creature now compared to the MMO newbie. You know, there's players with 7, 8, 9, 10 more years experience in multiple games. They're going to grasp things instinctively. They're going to be very good at them. They're going to execute them well. And they'll have thousands, plural, of hours experience in doing this stuff. Now, every game is going to be unique and different, but there's going to be skills that are going to transfer between every single game. Yet someone new comes into the equation. They haven't got those thousands of hours. They might just have 3. So their hard content could be someone else's easy content. Which brings us up to Angelic's point, it needs to branch. But by the same token, you can't give the best rewards for the easiest content because you can't trivialize or cheapen other people's experiences. At least in my view. Now, Silico saying hard content in Raid should be something that takes you ages. But I don't want to be bashing my head against a quest mob for weeks on end. That's an interesting perspective. I would turn around and say, okay, you've got a quest. The quest is the end of a quest chain. Let's say there's a really good reward. It's a really long quest chain. It's prestigious. I still go back to the hunter quests, hunter class quests in Vanilla WoW. Getting your Loch Dalar and everything else associated with it. It was prestigious and it was hard. So how many times is it acceptable to be killed by a quest mob? How many times is it acceptable to die to an event or a quest mob or something at the end of a quest chain, if it's solo or if it's grouped? I personally don't have a problem with a quest, particularly a group quest, taking 10 or 15 tries to figure out. I'd like to see some of that content outside of raids. Definitely needs to be there in raids because this is the measuring post. You can pit yourself against others and see where you end up. But at other times, there should be a challenge. How much? Don't know. How prepared? That depends on the players. So I'd love to see your answers to that one. Screeners are saying hard content, not defined by metrics, but by the experience and perspective of a player. That is true, but hard content is only hard from the viewpoint of the player themselves. But metrics will give you an idea as to where most players found something, if not hard, frustrating. If not hard, uncompletable. Now that could be because of a bug, it could be because of a lack of information, it could be because it was too darn difficult, or it could be because it was boring. So, more investigation is needed, but metrics give you the start point to say, where do we go, what do we investigate, what do we do next, what do we tweak? Tier Arctic saying, you should have something for everyone. Silico saying, do you mean one of... well, it could be a really big rat. Silico's just said, I do mean one of the rats in a kill 10 rats quest. In fact, that would be a great idea for a quest. They should be, rather than the typical go kill 10 rats, they should be go kill 10 rats, but each rat is harder than the last rat. And the 10th rat, it's a badass rat. I'd quite like to see that one somewhere. It would amuse me. So, Angelic Mayhem comes up with a really good question. Is it better to reveal all of your shiny elements before the game launches, or squirrel them away so the launch is exciting? And there's going to be a marketing and a PR answer to this. There's going to be a player answer to this. And they're not quite going to be the same thing. The answer is there needs to be a combination of both. Launch has to be exciting. People need to convert their pre-orders into purchases and start playing the game. People need to start subbing if that's the model of the game. People need to start using microtransactions if that's the model of the game, because ultimately the game needs to be a success. Now, you can have the world's best content, you can have the world's shiniest stuff, but if the game isn't making money, that content's eventually going to go to waste. So, on that basis, you need both. There should be a number of reveals, getting more and more exciting as the game goes on, and indeed we've seen that. I'd like to think that most game launches, they manage to keep one or two things reasonably secret so we can have some big surprises at launch. Not always the case, because of course you've got data mining and you've got the database sites and you've got so little adherence to NDA enclosed by some people, and of course so much available when things go open. You can always take the route of not making everything available in your betas, dropping it in later. That's always a good route to go down. Helzer making another comment. In the example, the different type of rats, easy rats for small XP, hard rats for medium XP, that could be fun. Then everyone can kill the rats they like. I mean, that works, and that's a good example of giving players diverging choice as time goes on. However, my example was around the challenge that could be put into a single-player quest to see how prepared players are. How much have they learnt on that journey? And it could be it's a little bit of niche content, but for some people, which rat did you get to? I got to rat number 7. Well, I got to rat number 8. And you can compare your rat EPs. It needs to be done sometimes. Tier Arctic, not every player is into battling and likes other type of content. It's bad to make the game unappealing to a casual. You have to think of every group of players and their playstyle. And this opens up another massive, massive can of worms. It'll be covered quite a bit in Campfire shows, which is the Tuesday night show with Pseudo, Screenager, and Blank, talking about different environments for different sorts of players. But casual is a funny word. To everyone, it means something different. So it's very difficult to pin down what is appropriate casual level content. Some people are casual because they don't have much time, but they want a really hard challenge, but they want to be able to go and explore those challenges and not require a 50-hour time sink to start each event. They'd still call themselves casual because they might only have 5 hours a week, but the skill level could be up here. There would be players who play for 50 hours a week, but they might struggle with some of the harder content. They might not be raiding. They may not be doing elite or veteran dungeons. So people would point to them and go, "You're casual." But they're playing for 50 hours a week. Is that casual? So it's really difficult to say we're balancing for casual, we're balancing for hardcore, we're balancing for anything. Hells are saying you can't have all content for all difficulty players. I'm not saying you can either to a point. There does have to be you have to be so high to ride this ride element to a game. There has to be an inherent level of difficulty, but beyond that inherent level of difficulty, there can be a scale. But what's critical to me is that the rewards tier in line with the difficulty. Because human nature is a wonderful thing, and humans always find the route of least resistance. So if I can achieve the shiny gold medal for killing 10 easy things versus killing 10 hard things, over time, players will navigate to the kill 10 easy things. And again, that has a bad effect on the game. Hells are saying again, I think it's okay if there are some games with only a higher difficulty level. I don't disagree with that. There is room and scope in the MMO market for some increased difficulty. We'll have to wait and see how well recent games and new games are going to fill that niche. And it'll be interesting to see culturally how a new generation or two of MMO players that might not have run into harder content recently, how they're going to react to this content that's out there. It's going to be an interesting ride. And it's going to be very interesting from a game developer perspective. If you're putting a game out there that is at the harder end of the scale, how do you then react to the community says, this is too hard? Because if you keep dumbing things down, you lose the essence of what makes a game. You can go back to the nerfs in WoW pre and post certain patches to raid content. To some people it was fantastic, this stuff is now accessible. To others it cheapened the experience. And you got the whole thing of saying, I cleared Sunwell pre-patch X. Can't remember the name of the patch. So it is pretty important that if you set a difficulty level, you sustain that difficulty level. And if you do make things easier for a certain piece of content, it should either be because of it's bugged or flawed, or because the piece of content itself has now been superseded by another piece of content, and therefore the rewards for that piece of content are now less relevant. So we have a question. The question is from Renis12. What is your view of MMO endgame content? Do you think they have gotten overall harder or easier compared to 10 years ago? I have to put my cards on the table and say things have got significantly easier in the main. But there are two things coming into play here. The first one is there is a more sophisticated worldview of MMO players. There is a different attitude with regards to things like quality of life in a game. Difficulty in, say, original EverQuest and some of the other games out there was in part made up of the environment, the amount of time that you had to put in, and the elements perhaps of luck and grinding that were involved. You had to get the spawn. You had to deal with being at the camp in the right place. You had to farm the X. Insert something here, and it made up part of the difficulty. So therefore, when you achieved something, it was a big achievement. The stuff you'd done was hard. Nowadays, due to quality of life, it's not very difficult to say, I want to start raiding. I want to do this. I want to do that. As more and more people get involved in it, it then only leaves the harder content, the veteran heroic raids, whatever might be out there in the game you're playing, to really be providing the challenge. Now, at the real top end, there's still some great challenges out there. You can go back to various things. Take Ulduar in WoW. Not recent, but in a slightly newer generation. There was some amazingly hard content. If you were doing things like Knock on Wood, the challenge for Freya, Knock on Wood, it was hard. If you were trying to do Mimiron on hard mode, it was hard. Fantastic content. But I will say the bulk of content has got easier. The bulk of content has got more accessible. And there is an expectation amongst players that they want to play however they want to play and they want to get the same rewards. LFR, looking for raid, as a concept, is not horrible. Let people go and raid. But the reality of having to make that content so easy to allow the people that wanted to experience it to be able to complete it, and then to trivialize the rewards that come off the back of it, that to me is a big no-no. And Gernicus, I completely agree. Firefighter is the achievement for Mimi hard mode, not standing in the fire. One of the best, most fun encounters I've ever played. Absolutely love that particular fight. Other than that, I'd have to point to Four Horsemen, 40 man. However, the other thing that's out there is the sophistication of the players. I'll deal with Arcade another day, Tyrantic. I'm not as up. I've dabbled in it. I'm not fully up to speed with it yet. Players are more sophisticated. We are better. We know how to take a character apart. We know how to build a DPS spreadsheet. We know how to use add-ons. We know how to communicate via voice. So players have improved. Even if content difficulty had been maintained, players would now be finding it easier off the back of our collective experience as players. Angelic Mayhem. Do you think real-world merchandise, toys, stickers, books really helps improve the success rate of a game launch? That's an interesting question. You have to define success rate. There's some things I can think of that it definitely does do, if done well. But if done badly, it can alienate. So if it's done well, it can bring people into that game world. Instead of holding this brown bottle, I could have an epic stein with some characters on it that would invest me in this game world. I don't, so I'm having to rely on that brown bottle. A game I'm interested in, well, there might be memorabilia that I have, and you can see some of that on the shelf behind. So you can get a level of investment because you've got involved with the out-of-game content, and that does affect a player sociologically, psychologically with regards to how they're going to interact with the game. So that is certainly true. But does it help with the success rate in terms of launch? No. It might help with player retention, player investment, player involvement. It certainly will help with the finances for a given game. It may give them more resources, but launch is its own separate microcosm and bubble. Launches are something that players anticipate, they look forward to, they plan for. You know, they get their snacks stocked up, they book time off work, they take the dog out for a walk and they go and stick the kids at the dog sitters. Whatever it is they do to make sure they have time and uninterrupted space to play the game. And then they sit and judge, was it a good launch? And ultimately, what do they judge it on? Was I able to log in? Was I able to play? Did game systems work? Did I have fun? Was I stuck in queues? Was there contention for mobs that just made me scream and throw my hands up in frustration? All these things are launched. Not to mention, were the servers stable? Kind of covered by, could I log in? Is it lagging? Memorabilia is fantastic. It supports the game, community, and environment. It helps players get invested in the IP, but it doesn't help with launch. Now, Screenage are saying it helps as a PR exercise. How would you relate the PR exercise to launch? Because I see those as, I agree with the PR exercise comment. I just don't necessarily believe that memorabilia relates to the launch itself. Robots Hate Me says the devs more money to do more stuff. Yep, you sell more stuff, they have more money to do stuff, but don't overestimate how many dollars per 10 of merchandise makes its way back to a development company or even a publishing company. There'll be so many middlemen in that chain. It's probably not as big a financial return for a physical item as you might think. Now, for a digital item, sure. If you have the mount of Uber Sparkle Pony and everybody wants it, well, if you sell a gazillion of them, you've just made a gazillion times whatever that is, less the transaction fees and the maintenance costs and the support costs of running that sales operation digitally. So it can certainly help. So Screen's come back with another comment. Screen's other half was not interested in Wildstar. Saw a Rousdower plushie. One of those, Screen. You can sit back up there. And is now interested in the game. I'd agree. I could definitely see that happening. Cute things do sell. They are cute. But it's not necessarily launch. Maybe that's the only thing I'm picking holes in, is whether or not that is defined as launch. Does it help the game community? Absolutely. Player numbers definitely helps player numbers. And Screeners are saying you should judge a good game launch by the experienced player's perspective. I totally agree. Everybody's point is valid, but some people's points will have more experience and weight to them based off the dint of the knowledge of the player. It's very easy if you don't know what you're dealing with to poke holes in something. It's very easy to go, this doesn't work, well maybe it does. But again, communication. Are the game systems being taught to new players? Are new players finding the game accessible? Are new players able to get involved and communicate with the community? All this stuff. Screen saying that I've misread. I judge a good launch by an experienced player's perspective and not by the layman's point of view on the street. Yes and no. There's an element of launch which is down to statements of fact. Could a significant percentage of the player base log in? Did game systems work for enough people? Was there high availability? Was the general experience good or bad? But then beyond those broad brush metrics, I kind of go to the experience viewpoint to dig in and analyze what was really going on here, what worked, what didn't work, things like that. But I fear we are probably running around to a bit of a conclusion. We can talk about different things and respond to questions happily, but there is one thread which we can't get away from, talking about preparing for launch. If you are releasing a game, you have two things. You have testing and you have communication, setting and managing expectations. If you are a player playing a game, funnily enough, the same thing is true. Communicate and be prepared. Know your roles. Know what you're doing, how you're organizing, how you're communicating. Get that stuff right as a group, and you can have a good launch. Do your research, in other words. And I'll take one more question, not entirely related, but Reniz12 is curious. How do I plan to level when Worldstar releases? Do I plan to power level? Or will I take my time and explore every corner of the world? You're hit on a sore point here, Reniz. I am famous for being incredibly bad at leveling. I always attempt to level very, very fast. I only ever manage to level very, very slowly. I have no intention of exploring the four corners of the world, but I do so anyway through my continual propensity to get lost. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but my personal aims will be to be part of the first 20 of our guild to hit end level, so we can start on the 20-man content, because I raid lead, so I kind of need to be there. Whether I can manage it or not, that's a different story. We shall see. Robots prefers to take your time. I don't know, Robots, to what degree you feel any pressure on you to get involved with endgame raiding. And that's often the counterpoint. We'll have to see. It is always a competitive time around game launch, getting to the point of starting to do that raid content, and then starting to compare yourself with others. Where are you at, if that's your playstyle? So guys, that's going to be a bit of a wrap-up. You've just had myself rambling for an hour on various things. Hopefully it has been interesting and some of you have been entertained. But let's tell you about what's coming up for the rest of the time. On Tuesday, of course, right here on the channel, it is Campfire. Join Screenager, join Blank, join Pseudo and guests as they look into everything around gaming and gaming communities. Wednesdays, it is the second edition of the Blizzard Forecast, and we have some fun stuff tucked up our sleeves for you with that. So join myself and Parv and Blank and probably someone else this week, as we start to, or continue to, dig into Heroes and Draenor and everything that falls under that Blizzard IP. Thursdays, there's probably going to be some streaming going on the channel. We'll have to see. And Fridays, of course, it's going to be Cosmotronic. It's going to be our Wildstar show, where we'll actually be digging in real detail into the game and game systems. And we'll see. There's hopefully going to be some information coming out this week that we'll be able to talk about on Friday, but we shall see. But that is MMO Buff, of course, MMOBuff.TV. For the website and for the articles. There's some great articles out there that I hope people have read over the last couple of weeks. Do check it out. If you normally just see us on Twitch, go have a look at our written word stuff as well. And of course on social media, MMOBuff on Facebook, MMOBuff on Twitter, MMOBuff on Twitch, and I'm sure MMOBuff in many other places as well. So, screen is telling me, actually, we have some Matiga guys in again on Tuesday. So there you go. You can get up to speed with what's happening there. And Robots Hate Me, Enigma is an EU guild. And we are McLeod going exile. But we do have people from NA and elsewhere as well. We're pretty diverse. But on that note, it's time for me to say goodbye. So as always, this is Mizpah for MMOBuff, signing off. Cheers, gents. Enjoy.
Greetings, everyone. Sudo here. Thanks for watching our latest episode of the MMOBuff podcast. If you have any questions or comments, do be sure to leave them below because we do love engaging in discourse with our viewers. Of course, if you'd like to watch a previous episode, please click the bubbly heads at the very top of the screen. And yeah, if you like this, click like, share it, subscribe. We want to bring you good stuff. Speak with you soon. Toodle pip.